All right, welcome everybody. So, as I've told some of you, we're going to be starting a Rambam course. I started putting this together about 2 weeks ago. I've been working hard on it. It's already more than 60 pages and not even done. There's a lot more material that I still have to go through. So, it's probably going to take more than a month to get through it all. Once a week, Tuesdays, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. We've already been talking for almost 2 hours. So I'm going to try and go through this first lesson a little quickly, but it's going to be every week. So it's going to be very, very thorough. We're going to go through a lot of stuff, but because I'm already losing my voice because how much we've already been talking before the recording, we're going to try and go through this quickly. So this will be a shorter video. Okay, so let's share screen with sound, share. Okay, let's go here. Minimize everybody in the room. Okay, that's not what I wanted to do. Is that it? Everybody up here. Okay, so everybody see the Microsoft Word document that I've got, biography of the Rambam.
Yes.
Okay, so Rambam is how I refer to him. His name is actually Moshe ben Maimon, also known as Maimonides. I guess. Okay, Moshe ben Maimon means Moshe, son of Maimon. I guess Maimonides is the Greek. Ades means son of Maimon. So rabbi was a term that was invented later. As far as the acronym, like Rambam goes, he didn't refer to himself as Rambam. So somebody attributed Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, Rambam. So that's the acronym that we have, but his name is actually Moshe ben Maimon. Okay, so we're going to talk about the Rambam a lot. That's what we're going to be looking at: Rambam's letters, his introductions, among a lot of other things. So these are very interesting parts of the Rambam's legacy that are sometimes underreported or underrepresented. So I'm going to start more or less with a biography just so you'll have a basic sense of the Rambam's life, who he was, why I talk about him so much. Okay, the Rambam is, of course, an abbreviation for Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. I need to change that. See, it's a work in progress. Okay, his father was Maimon, so this is where the name Maimonides comes from. According to some traditions, his lineage goes back to King David, although this is not mentioned by the Rambam himself. Some later tried to trace him back in that way. In fact, if you look on Chabad's website, there's a guy giving a short history of him, and he says there's a famous saying that from Moshe until Moshe, there never lived another one like Moshe. Okay, let's see if we can find that quick. Let's go over here. Probably should have had that up earlier, but okay, let me see if I can find it. Okay, Rambam. I think it might be faster to find it on YouTube. So let's look at Chabad on Rambam. Torah. Is it this one? Maybe it is. Let's see.
Rabbi Moshe,
Yeah,
the son
this
of
is it.
Maimon, was born in Spain but lived most of his life in 12th century Egypt. You may know him as Rambam or Maimonides. Most Jews of the era knew him as Ibn Ovadia, named for Ovadia, the patriarch of his family, going back 7 generations. Rambam was a world-famous philosopher. Till this very day, his Mora Nevuchim, Guide of the Perplexed, which has no less than 83 commentaries, is studied by philosophers and students as a classic work of philosophy. Perhaps you heard the saying, Mi Moshe ve'ad Moshe lo kam kim Moshe. From Moses to Moses, there arose no one like Moses. Indeed, even during his lifetime, Rabbi Moshe.
Okay, there's that quote. From Moshe to Moshe, there was no one that lived like Moshe. I didn't understand what that meant at first, but I found the explanation later on, so we'll see that.
Moshe ben Maimon was compared to the greatest Jew who ever lived, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, the Torah giver. The Jews of Yemen held him in such high regard that they prayed for him every time they said Kaddish. On his original gravestone, Rambam was referred to as Mivchar Ha'anushi, the best of mankind. Rambam was the personal trusted physician of the powerful emperor and warrior Saladin of Egypt. In fact, some of Rambam's medical works were written exclusively for the royal family. Today, over 900 years since birth, there are hospitals and schools, even stamps and currency honoring him. Arguably, it's Rambam's series of 14 books that took him 10 years to write that is his most significant contribution. He named it Mishnah Torah, meaning second to the Torah of Moses. Unlike all his other works written in Arabic, Mishnah Torah was written in Hebrew. In his introduction, Rambam promised those who learned his work, study the Torah of Moses, and then study my Mishnah Torah, and you will be fluent in Jewish law. Did this amazing work gain the popularity it rightfully deserved? Not entirely, at least not the way Rambam envisioned it would. So, in order to promote learning of Mishnah Torah, Jewish leaders came out with some very creative ideas. For example, several years after Rambam's passing, Rabbi Tanchum HaYerushalmi wrote a Hebrew-Arabic Mishnah Torah dictionary to assist Middle Eastern Jews who were not very familiar with the Hebrew language. Another resourceful Sephardic rabbi from Turkey in the 17th century by the name of Shlomo ibn Muvchar noticed how people were more interested in songs and poetry than studying Mishnah Torah. So what did he do? He rearranged the words of the entire Mishnah Torah, thus transforming it into an incredible blend of song and poetry. Shortly after the printing press was invented, the Jews of Italy published a sort of Kitzer Mishnah Torah, an abridged version. This single volume made it affordable and accessible for every Jew to study on a regular basis. But that was only for the Jews of Italy. Despite all these efforts to popularize it, for the past 800 years, the Mishnah Torah has been used mainly as a reference book, a starting point for the hair-splitting analysis of the wisest Talmudic scholars. But Mishnah Torah is a lot more than that. It covers every aspect of Jewish life, from morning to evening, from India to Indianapolis to Israel, from birth till death. The prolific Rambam combed the entire corpus of Jewish literature and arranged the laws in a perfectly organized system. Everything was there, and everything had a place. If a Jew had a question in halacha, Jewish law, he only needed to open the appropriate section and quickly find his answer. Although the accepted contemporary halacha does not always follow the rulings of Mishnah Torah, learning it provides every Jew with an amazing opportunity to learn Kol HaTorah Kulo, the entire Torah, even the laws of the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple. To facilitate learning all the laws of the Torah, In 1984, Lubavitcher Rebbe initiated a campaign for every single Jew to learn Mishnah Torah on a daily basis.
I encourage you to join the movement. Choose from one of three options. Either learn one chapter of Mishneh Torah per day, 3 per day, or sections of my Sefer HaMitzvot, the Book of Commandments. Indeed, it's a new world, a world that is getting closer and closer to the words that conclude my Mishneh Torah, Umala'ah ha'aretz de'at Hashem, kamayim layam michasim. And the world will be filled with the knowledge of God, like the sea is covered with water.
Okay, so I recommend everybody go through 3 chapters a day of Mishnah Torah. You'll learn it in 1 year. If you do it once in your life, you've done something that probably 90% of rabbis have not done. Go through the entire thing. Go through it more than once, you've done something that probably 95% of rabbis have not done. But you see how much respect even Chabad has for Rambam. Not everybody is Chabad, like myself. So let's see. Why? I need somebody who's tech savvy to clip that Bill O'Reilly clip where he said, "We'll do it live," so we could like insert it here, like B-roll that we can roll in. Okay, why I follow Rambam in 4 minutes. So kind of doing this live. Sorry for not having these things ready to go where I can just click right on it. Okay, Yonatan Halevi, another one that I respect. Non-Chabad. He gives you a good explanation too.
Why is it that you're so stuck on the Rambam? Why not another? There are other great rabbis in the world. That's right. You're correct. There are other great rabbis in the world. Who says the Rambam is always right? Nobody said. But listen carefully. There's no one else aside from the Rambam. No one else. Not one Chacham in the history of the Jewish people, not one, who wrote a book that covered all of Jewish law from A to Z. Maran wrote a Shulchan Aruch only on the relevant areas of halakha that were for Jews in exile. Not on the laws of the Bet Mikdash, not on the laws of judges, not on the laws of Korbanot, not on the laws of... Maran doesn't talk about any of those things. Who else gave us a book of halakha that is set like a table? Who else knew halakha? It's one thing to know halakha well, but to know halakha so well that you could say, the Talmud that you study 1 page a day for 7.5 years, I'll write a summary of the whole Talmud without missing a point, without missing a topic. Not only am I going to summarize it for you, I'm going to rearrange it for you by order of topics. I'm going to write it clearly, so clearly that you can analyze every single word and find the proper halakha. There's a reason why the Rambam uses one word over another word. Simply nobody else ever did something. The Rambam, in the words of our Chachamim, is one who gamar v'savar. He studied it all. He knew it all. Even Maran writes about the Rambam that anywhere that he doesn't have an opinion, Maran doesn't say something, follow the Rambam. Many people complain about Maran. Maran is pretty much a copy of the Rambam. Yes, there are places where Maran disagrees. I'm not going to avoid that issue. Maybe we'll deal with it another day. But Maran says, where you don't know what to do like the Rambam. Where did that come into practical application for me? When I put chelet on my tzitzit, and you have to figure out, so how do you put chelet on the tzitzit? There are different opinions. That says in the Torah you should put a string of blue on the corner of your tzitzit. So entertain me for a moment. You have a corner of your tzitzit, yes? Can I tell me something?
Talking about techelet now.
You have one corner, yes? On this corner, how many strings are there? There are 4 strings that end up becoming 8. Why? Because you loop them through and you have 8. How many, don't look at my notes, how many strings are supposed to be blue? One of...
Okay, so if you have the physical copy of Mishnah Torah, it's so thorough. If you could see right there, it's showing you where does the hole need to be on your talit. We're discussing techelet here, white strings on your tzitzit. Rambam actually tells you how to make the authentic techelet. Some people disagree. There's different opinions on how was it actually made. You could say we don't know for sure, but he gives you a recipe to make the actual techelet, the blue thread It's supposed to be mixed with the white strings. So this is what he's discussing here.
4, which would mean 2 out of 8. 1 out of 8, which would mean half a string. When it says a kanaf petil techelet, there should be 1 string of blue on the corner of the tzitzit. Maran doesn't say. Why does Maran not say?
Different opinion.
Maran doesn't have
Does have chelet.
chelet. Maran is writing a Shulchan Aruch for Jews who are in exile. There is no chelet for Maran. The Rambam is very clear. The Rambam says 1 out of 8. So that's why if you look on one side, you'll see 3 white and 1 blue. And you flip over the talit, and it's 4 white, because halfway through, we stop dyeing the blue. This blue string ends up becoming white. Because when I don't know what Maran would want, Maran would say to follow the Rambam. That's all I need to know. Why so much respect to the Rambam? Because nobody else did it. Well, we hold like this, we don't hold like that, we hold like this rabbi, we hold like another rabbi. Who else could tell us everything like the Rambam? So you follow another rabbi in one place where he argues with the Rambam. Where else do you follow that rabbi? You don't even know what that rabbi believed anywhere else. The Rambam is the only one who wrote a book of halachot that is all-encompassing.
Okay, so to make Rambam's tzitzit, there's diagrams. How to tie them. You know, the opinions, there's 4 strings. You fold them in half, so now it's 8. Do you dye 1? So 1 whole string, 2 strings. According to Rambam, you dye half of 1 string. So we fold them in half. Now you have 1 of 8 is blue. So it's very thorough. It's very easy to explain. It's got diagrams. The Shulchan Aruch, the author of the Shulchan Aruch tells you go by Rambam. I mean, there's no book like it to this very day. Nobody has ever done what he did. So it makes me not even want to talk about this course right now. It makes me want to go into the introduction of to Mishnah Torah, but I'm going to hold myself back. I said we're doing the course, so we're going to do that. So this is where were we? Okay, yeah, that saying that we saw in the Chabad video. There's a famous saying, from Moshe until Moshe, they never lived another one like Moshe. So I wrote this in the beginning. I'm like, so then which Moshe were we talking about? Moshe Rabbeinu or Moshe ben Maimon? In some ways, obviously, it puts him on the same level as Moses, which I realize is a controversial statement, but I didn't come up with the same. Although, if I were to ask who has done the most for Judaism since Moses, I don't think it could be a serious conversation without including Rambam as one of the top contenders. Since going through and putting this together, I learned where this statement comes from. Okay, on his grave, apparently, it's like a tourist site. You can go to Israel and see the tomb of the Rambam. It says, from Moshe to Moshe, there never lived another one like Moshe. And it says, Yad HaHazakah. Why does it say that? As we just heard, Mishnah Torah means the second to the Torah. This is what Rambam called it. But it's 14 books, so Gematria, I guess Yad HaHazakah equals 14. And it's 14 books, so they call it Yad HaHazakah. Even though Rambam didn't call it that, was the name they called it later. But this saying, from Moses to Moses, there never lived another one like Moses. That's from Deuteronomy 34:12, I think it is. Okay, so I'm reading from the JPS Tanakh. It's like the last verse in Deuteronomy. It says, never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses, whom the Lord singled out face to face, for the various signs and portents that the Lord sent him to display in the land of Egypt against Pharaoh and all his courtiers and his whole country, and for the great might and awesome power that Moses displayed before all of Israel. But the translation here for all the great might and awesome power, when you look in the Hebrew, it says Yad HaHazakah, with the strong hand. This is what Moses did for the Jewish people. So this is what they're calling Mishnah Torah, Yad HaHazakah. What Rambam did for the Jewish people was on the level of what Moses did. So from Moshe Rabbeinu to Moshe ben Maimon, there's never been anyone who did more for the Jewish people than Moshe ben Maimon. Not to say what he did was more than what Moses, but from Moses until him, nobody has done more for the Jewish people than Rambam since Moses. So I later learned that's what that quote means. Okay, so his greatness was in 3 different areas. He was, of course, Great as one of the greatest halakhic scholars that we ever had in terms of halacha. I'm using Hebrew words here. I like to capitalize the first one. He was one of the greatest religious philosophers we had in terms of theology, philosophy, logic, and the like. And what may be least important for us today, he was indeed one of the greatest physicians or medical doctors of the Middle Ages. Now, granted, a lot of what he says in the medical area might not be that relevant today, without a lot of advancements in medical technologies. But if he were alive today, he would instruct us to accept the advancements in medical technology like he did in his generation, rather than require us to remain primitive. I don't remember what this is. I guess I overlooked this. So for me, well, his greatest achievement was Mishnah Torah because I deal a lot with halacha. For others that are more into terms of philosophy, he's the greatest philosopher, the Jewish philosopher that ever lived. So if you're philosophically minded, you're going to like the Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide for the Perplexed. If you're legalistic, um, more of a legal scholar, then you're going to like his halakhic work, which is Mishnah Torah. So, and then he's had a bunch of other things too that he's done that we're going to go over. But so he's great for more than one reason. So you can choose whichever side you identify with, whichever side that is. There's reasons to respect Rambam. Okay, so one of the letters we're going to look at is called a letter about the resurrection of the dead. The Rambam was accused of not believing in physical resurrection and only talking about the surviving of the soul, not the return of the body. Of course, it's interesting that in the Rambam's 13 principles of faith, the 13th principle of faith is resurrection. So the Rambam was accused of not believing in his own fundamental principles of faith. And he wrote a very long letter to explain what his position was and that, in fact, he does believe in it. Even though he doesn't mention it a lot, he gave reasons why he doesn't talk about it a lot, or doesn't talk a lot about it. It is true that when Rambam talks about Olam Haba, the world to come, he always talks about the soul and not the body. So the Rambam explains why he did that, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So just a little bit about the biography of him. He was born on Erev Pesach, the 14th of Nisan. Mishnah Torah is 14 books. We learn about how he counts mitzvot, Sefer HaMitzvot. There's 14 metrics, 14 boxes that have to be checked in order for him to count it as a mitzvah. The gematria 14, so the number 14 comes up a lot with Rambam. So if you're mystically inclined, you might attribute some divinity to that, although not absolute. He has 13 principles of faith. But he was born on Erev Pesach in Cordoba, Spain, then under Islamic rule, son of Maimon, who was a judge. We don't really know anything about his mother, unfortunately. And he had the title of the Great Eagle, a title uniquely given to him, possibly symbolizing his soaring intellect. I have never heard this before. I learned that in preparing for this, but apparently somebody attributed that to him after he died. I don't think he knew himself by that title. Exile and wanderings at 13. So he lived from 1135 to 1204 of the Common Era. So during this period here, he was 13, where his family fled Spain due to prosecution by the Almohads, a fanatical Muslim sect. He wandered for 11 years through Morocco. I guess Fez is the capital of Morocco. This is why I wish I would have had a chance to go through this and prepare before doing it live. And briefly, he lived in the land of Israel, where he visited the Kotel and davened near the Har Habayit. He settled in Old Cairo, Egypt in 1166 after his father's died. So his father was wandering around with him. Once he died, that's when he went to Cairo. He also had a younger brother named David, who was a gem merchant. He drowned in a shipwreck. So his brother was like a jewel merchant, and I think he went to the Orient, like to the East, and he would trade in valuable jewels. So Rambam did not come from poverty. He had a wealthy family member, this jewel merchant, who supported him, which is how he was allowed to study and learn and become the gadol that he was. He wasn't bogged down with working. He became a physician later after his brother died, leaving the family destitute. The fortune was gone, so he later became a physician, and that'll be important when we learn his philosophy on should a rabbi have a job or be a full-time rabbi. So he went into a year-long depression, and the money that they had that he was living off of coming from his brother, which allowed him to stay home and study and learn, that went away. So he was forced to become a physician to support his family. Okay, so David Ben Maimon, Rambam's younger brother, was a jewel merchant who would buy and sell precious stones. When he was in the diamond business, ruby business, whatever the precious stones were, and he was the one that supported the family and enabled Rambam, his older brother, to spend his life primarily in learning. The Rambam was not a doctor then. The Rambam was what you might call a kotel person. Now, this itself raises an interesting issue because what the Rambam writes in the Mishneh Torah, a book that was written later, the Rambam seems to take a very strong anti-kollel position. He says anyone who gets money, anyone who takes money for Torah study is desecrating God's name and is not living the way Hashem wants him to live. He says that the Torah should not be made a spade. Spade is a tool that you can use to make money with, but yet he himself did learn and was provided support. But he believes you should have a job and you should be teaching on the side. This is what he did after he became a physician. He taught on the side, and there's different reasons for that. But he says Hashem wants him to have parnasah, to have an outside job. In Rambam's case, it was as a physician. As he points out, Hillel was a woodcutter, and that other great rabbis were blacksmiths or tailors or shoemakers. He says the derech of Torah in which you combine, this is the derech of Torah, in which you combine economic parnasah with learning of Torah. The Rambam is very much against the idea of people who take money for learning Torah. He says that you should not turn the Torah into a spade. A spade is a tool that you can dig a ditch with, meaning the Torah should not be a tool that you can make money with. So I kind of understand his point here, because if you are a congregational rabbi and let's say you're in a conservative, they have a board. They negotiate your salary. There's a contract. If the board doesn't like what you're saying, they're not going to renew your contract. They may even sever it immediately. So now, because you were teaching something that the congregation, the board doesn't want to hear, you're now out of a job. Where if you're doing what Rambam did, his bills were paid. He was a physician to the Sultan. If he said something you don't like, not reliant on them financially. So I think this is kind of the point that he made. So you're not beholden to the community. If the truth is not popular and perhaps even offensive, you can say what the truth is. If you don't like what the truth is, you can't really fire me. All my bills are paid from my employer. So I agree with that philosophy. But the contradiction that this seems to point out is that the commentaries try to qualify this and say, oh, this can't be. They come up with an idea that in Rambam's time, people were great enough that they could combine their working with their Torah. But today, the generations have become so bad that you have to do this. I don't want to go into the justifications for that, but the question I just want to raise is that the Rambam himself, until the tragedy happened to his brother, was in fact supported by his Torah study. So they're trying to say there's a contradiction. Rambam wants you to have a job, not learn full time. But yet Rambam himself did learn full time. And the justification that, well, the rabbis back then can do it because they were so great. I just heard somebody say the Rambam, not Rambam, the Rambam. They say the rabbis today, the greatest rabbis we have today, don't equal the smallest toenail of the Rambam. I find this to be elevating rabbis to unhealthy levels. I've heard another one say that rabbis today are like donkeys compared to the rabbis of before. So this is the case they're trying to make. Back then, they could work and and learn because they were so great. Today, each generation is farther away from Torah. We lose information. We've lost so much of it. So we're not capable of doing that anymore. We have to learn full time. Well, so much for everything being transmitted word for word for all these years. Okay, so
I'm sorry, Rabbi. I had a point that I wanted to, I guess I was thinking while you were talking about that.
yeah, go ahead.
Maybe perhaps maybe instead of the opinion, I mean, where it was contradictory, maybe that's the appreciation of why he emphasized that is because he was, in fact, his brother took care of him, but then once he worked, maybe he realized that there could be a better balance that,
Yeah.
you don't I mean, it's great if you can do that, but maybe there was a level of appreciation that wasn't observed, during that time until it had gone. But then he also realized that you can have worth and value in doing both.
Yeah, I think you're right.
That's my
And the
opinion.
way we try to harmonize these two positions, do you work and study? Even though he himself did study, I think we're going to see exactly what you mentioned here. So apparently, the Rambam would differentiate between communal support, demands on the community, and intra-family support. Meaning, the Rambam says there's nothing wrong with if you have a family that wants to support you in your learning. That's what his brother did. His brother supported him so that he could do it. Fine, that's within your family. Your family can support you, that's their prerogative. Rambam was against making demands on the community. He was against telling the community that you have to support me so that I can learn. But the Rambam himself was supported by his brother David. And the Rambam describes his brother David very much wanted to support the Rambam. So it wasn't that his brother said, you should get a job, but you refuse, so I'm going to support you. He wanted Rambam to learn and be the gadol that he was in that area. So if your family says, okay, we don't want to have a big house and a big vacation every year, we don't necessarily require 10 kids, so a 10-bedroom house. We're fine with living within our means, families sharing bedrooms. We don't need a TV in every room, whatever. Then if the family is willing to support you while all you do is learn for a higher purpose, a higher goal, then I think he would be okay with that. But I think he would be against telling the community, you have to go work 2 jobs so you can afford to support the rabbi who's learning. I think that impurifies it in some way. We want the truth to be told, and we don't want to burden the community, and we don't want them to be able to hold that over us. So we can get in fight with people at the Seder. I'm right because I'm right. I don't care who you are. And we can speak the truth even if it's offensive. And I don't have to worry about hiding the truth because you might fire me. So I'm free to speak the truth. Okay, so the roles in Egypt. I don't know what this town is, but he was the spiritual leader of the Jewish community, the political representative of Muslim rulers. He was the physician to the Sultan of Saladin. So he was not just a physician; he was a physician to the Sultan. Yeah, this is a big role, and everyone that was on his court. So it was exhausting. He treated the royal court by day, but Jews by night, leaving little time for Torah study. It's often said that he would be studying on the way home, like riding a camel home. And he would get home, he would ask for only 15 minutes to eat because he worked all day, got home, he's 15 minutes to eat, and then he's teaching the students. He was also laying in bed, answering questions to the people that would come and ask, diagnosing their medical conditions, working as a doctor and as a rabbi, as a teacher at the same time. So he's attributed to being like sort of a workaholic. So the major works. We talked about Mishnah Torah. This is what I'm a big fan of. But before that came his commentary on the Mishnah, his Parush HaMishnayot. Not to be confused with his introduction to the Mishnah. His introduction to the Mishnah has amazing things in it. You should all buy this. His introduction to the Mishnah, it's a very thin book. It's like $12. You can get it on Amazon. It's really good because we're dealing with legal things. It explains things like how halakha functions. It gives you a great introduction to that. You'll hear people today say, well, everything's halakha l'Moshe Sinai. Laws given to Moses at Mount Sinai, it all comes from there. It's 30 items. He lists the 30 laws given to Moses at Mount Sinai. If it's not one of those 30 items, it's probably just a tradition, potentially developed later. Potentially, we don't know where it came from, so you're attributing it to that. But he gives you a very systematic approach. He tells you there where you should be committed to truth. Even if you have the ability, some verbal judo, you know the group is respects you, they'll side with you over the person you're debating with, even if you can convince the crowd to side with you. If you see the younger, less knowledgeable person is right, you should withdraw your opinion and go with his, because that's the commitment to truth that the rabbis in the Talmud had. So this is what the way we should be. So it's a very valuable book. So I don't want you to mistake the introduction to the Mishnah with his commentary on the Mishnah, the Purusha Mishnah. He goes through the entire Mishnah, gives you a commentary on it. There's some sections of the Mishnah that to this day there's no Gemara on it, but he wrote a Gemara on it. So he was very proud to be the first one doing that. So his Purusha Mishnayot is the very first comprehensive commentary on the entire Mishnah, written during his wanderings between the ages of 20 and 30. He completed it at the age of 30, although he did continue to revise it throughout his life. And we know he did this because you see later the Mishnah Torah was written. Okay, so he'll say in his Purusha Mishnayot, on some sections, he'll say, I'll give you a brief explanation, and then he'll say, well, I go into more detail about this in my Mishnah Torah. Well, how can that be? The Mishnah Torah wasn't written yet. So this goes to show he revisited, as we should, as you learn more information, learn new things. You should go back and say, okay, I've come into some new information. I found a better way of explaining this, and I did that in my Mishnah Torah, which I wrote later. So he went back and revised it and included these types of notes in his commentary to the Mishnah. Now, a problem with that, the good thing is it shows he did revise it. The problem with that is we didn't have a printing press. Once he wrote his commentary to the Mishnah, this is by manuscript. It was distributed because people needed this. So there's people out there that preserve this material. Later we have a printing press. Now somebody else finds one of the revisions, a manuscript version where he revised it. So now today you would call that a second edition, I guess. So your first edition might contradict your second edition. So that's one kind of an issue, but this was just a sign of the times. We didn't have printing presses, these types of technologies. But it does go to show he did revise it throughout his lifetime. So it included the 13 principles of faith, anim ma'amin. Not to be confused with this book, which I talked about earlier. You might start a book club. That's one to consider if you want to read that. Okay, it's not fully translated into English yet. So don't be confused this with the introduction to the Mishnah, which has been translated. So if you want to go to the Purusha Mishnayot, you're going to need to be able to read Hebrew. Just goes to show you this very day how much work there is that we could be doing. Things that to this day have still not been translated into English to make it more accessible. The Mishnah Torah, which I'm going to beat to death, how everybody needs to be going through this. I don't think any Jewish kid should get out of high school without learning Mishnah Torah at least once. This has been translated into English. As I was showing you earlier, the Toger edition. This is the Chabad's version. It looks like, okay, it's 14 volumes, right? It looks like a very big book. But inside, you're going to find, okay, this is the English right here. This is the translation of the Hebrew, which is here. And all of this is the commentary. So if you're just going to read the English, this is your page. So really, 25% of what I showed you is this book. Because the other 25% is Hebrew, and the other 50% is commentary. So I don't know. There's another version out there. It's like black, purple, I think. I don't know if it has commentary, but it's much thinner. But this is the version that I have. I like it because it has the commentary. It'll show you where Rambam says this, the Hebrew, here's the English that you're reading. And the commentary says the Ravad disagrees, and here's why the Ravad disagrees. And then it'll show you, even though the Ravad disagrees, Yosef Karo agreed with Rambam, and this is what went into the Shulchan Aruch. So yes, there's people that disagree, but it shows you when almost nobody disagrees. And everybody you meet says we go by the Shulchan Aruch, and this is what Yosef Karo put in the Shulchan Aruch, where he found in the Rambam. So that's the version that I use. So don't get intimidated when you say, I have to read 14 of these. You'll get through it much quicker. And I'll show you how to do that if you like in the introduction to the Mishnah Torah. Okay, so he wrote this after midnight, after his medical duties. As you've heard the Chabad and Yosef or Yonatan Halevi say, it is the only complete codification of halakha that we have to this very day. There's not a single person which has duplicated it. There is no other work like it. Okay, it's controversial for omitting sources and rulings definitively. When it says he omitted sources, he did not give you the sources for where I got this from. Okay, there's a reason why he did that. He went through the entire Talmud, meaning the Mishnah and the Gemara in the Jerusalem Talmud, as well as the Mishnah and the Gemara in the Babylonian Talmud. He also went through all of the Baraitot, the Sifri, the Sifra, the Hilta, the Tosefta. He went through all of that stuff and he codified the halakha. So now that you have the halakha, where did he get it from? Did he get it from the Tosefta? Did he get it from the Mishnah? Did he get it from the Jerusalem Gemara or the Babylonian Gemara? He didn't give you the source. He didn't want you to be bogged down. This rabbi said this, that rabbi said that, because then you're going to say, well, if Rashi says this, but the Ramah says this, Rashi must be right. Rashi is very popular. He's in every Chumash. The truth should not be decided by the popularity of the rabbi. So he didn't want you to be bogged down in all these sources. So he intentionally left them out. They even asked him sometimes, what's the source for this? He would say, I'm not sure. Doesn't mean he doesn't know. If there is a source, it means he didn't know which Gemara did it come from. I know it's somewhere, but I don't know where the source for this is. I don't know which place I got it from. Remember, he reorganized the order of it. So if you want to know how to keep Shabbat in the original Mishnah, you might have to look at Shabbat. You might have to look at Sanhedrin to see what did they rule. You might have to look at Eruvin to determine how laws are carrying within an Eruv function. He changed the structure where now if you want to know how to keep Shabbat, you look at Hilchot Shabbat. You don't have to go to 5 different areas to find out how to keep Shabbat. So he intentionally omitted sources for that reason. Now we're not left completely without sources for it today. Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, wrote what's called the Kesef Mishnah. And this is Yosef Karo's attempt to say, where did Rambam get this from? So he says, I think Rambam got this from the Gemara. I think he got this from the Tosefta. Sometimes he himself is not sure. Because I think this is what Rambam's quoting here in the Gemara. But he seems to only be quoting the first half of it. It's questionable why he doesn't mention the second half. So if you want to know where Rambam got it from, you can read the Kesef Mishnah, and this will tell you where Yosef Karo thinks that Rambam got it from. But it is kind of sad that Rambam did not, while he wrote the Mishnah Torah, write a separate work, his own guide to the Mishnah Torah, where he could tell you where the sources came from. But when you see how great people talk about what he did, that to this very day nobody even copied it, we can't really fault him for not doing more than what he did. Okay, so it was controversial for that. It was also controversial was his introduction, because for several reasons. But one reason is because he took the power away from the rabbis and he put it in the hands of the people and made Judaism accessible for everyone. A lot of people didn't know how to read Hebrew, or Aramaic. You wanted to know, what's the law? How do I live as a kosher Jew? What am I allowed to eat? What am I not? You had to go to a rabbi to tell you. That rabbi had to go through the entire Talmud, figure out what the law is. You don't have to do that anymore. Now you can go through the Mishnah Torah, and he will tell you what is the law. You don't have to wade through the debates and the Yagadah, the folklore and legend, the Midrashim. You can just get this is what the law is. Every person can do it. It's another clip that I have on my channel. Ken Spiro teaches at the Esha Torah Yeshiva in Israel. Today, you can paskin halacha even if you're not in the smicha program to become a rabbi. You can go. It's a 100% valid way to paskin halacha according to what they're teaching at Esha Torah. Got the clip on my channel by following what Rambam says in the Mishnah Torah. You don't have to ask your local rabbi. You can go by Mishnah Torah. All of you, anyone watching this, assuming you're Jewish. And not everybody watching this is. Okay, so they didn't like that. They also didn't like the name Mishnah Torah. It's the second to the Torah. What do you mean? We have the Torah, and now we have your book. You're giving us the second Torah. So this is kind of where he took it from Deuteronomy. It's considered like the repetition of the Torah. That scroll, Deuteronomy, is like the second Torah. It's a repetition of the law. This was the reference, Yad HaZakah. So that was controversial for that reason. What do you mean? Rabbis bigger than you didn't do this. You have the guts to do this. So it was controversial for that reason. So he says in his introduction to the Mishnah Torah, now you can be fluent in mitzvot, Torah commandments, and halacha, Torah Shiba al Peh, the rulings of the court, oral law. You don't need any other book. All you need is the 5 books of Moses and this, the Mishnah Torah. So people were very offended about that. They burned some of his books, not just more in the Nevuchim. The next one we're going to talk about, the guy from Flex, because of the philosophy, but they burned Mishnah Torah because they said, who are you to do something so bold like this? Which now you see today, you can't learn halacha without it. So that's Mishnah Torah. Very controversial, but today, monumental work. Guide for the Perplexed, the more in the Nevuchim. This is not for everybody. So the Mishnah Torah there's 2 separate audiences. One is Mishnah Torah is for the layman who wants to know how to keep the law. So everybody, whether you're high in stature, low in stature, educated, uneducated, it's in clear and concise terms. Anybody can understand Mishnah Torah. That's one audience, how to keep the law. The other audience is the guide for the perplexed. People who are struggling with the philosophy. How do I make what I see happening today? We have a different understanding of science. We're hearing Big Bang Theory, evolution. How do I make this jive with my religion? Not everybody's struggling with it. You don't have these types of questions? Good. You don't have to read the guide for the perplexed. If you do have these type of questions, that's what this book is for. Different audience. A more advanced work. So this is the philosophical work reconciling Torah with Aristotelian thought. I guess he was big on Aristotle, which everybody was. This was their understanding at the time. So the guide for the perplexed was burned by critics, including some Jews who didn't like what he was doing, and later by the church in Paris in 1242, alongside the Talmud. So they gathered up all these Talmuds and they say, you can't have this. Said also you can't have the more in the book. Controversies. Opposition to the Mishnah Torah. The Ravad, he argued that it discouraged Talmud study. Ravad he went through the entire Mishnah Torah. He was like a younger contemporary of Rambam, and he goes through the whole Mishnah Torah, and every few paragraphs he's inserting what he disagrees with Rambam about. And he starts at the introduction. How can you say these things that you're saying in your introduction? So he was very critical of Rambam. The Guide for the Perplexed was accused of heresy for its rationalism. Rambam defended his belief in resurrection, even though, because he was accused of not believing it, you're such a rational person, why aren't you dealing with these mystical concepts? So he defended that he believes in it, even though he said it sort of a mocking way. It's like, yeah, you will resurrect, but you're going to die again. So it's not what you other rabbis are teaching. You're going to resurrect in a perfect state and be that way forever. You're still going to die. And he didn't expound a lot on it, but he made it one of the 13 principles. So it's kind of wrong to say he doesn't believe in it because he did include it. It was sort of a rumor that he converted to Islam. This was a rumor spread not only by Muslims but by Jews that didn't like him. They accused him of that, and he wrote letters to people saying, those that are living in Muslim lands, what do we do? Do we convert? Do we pretend to convert? What happens if I'm outwardly Muslim, and I'm still keeping mitzvot because in my heart I'm still a Jew? Legally, am I still a Jew? Am I obligated to give up my life and convert to Islam? If I do convert to Islam, what does this mean for me? So he was writing letters instructing people on this at a very young age, like 20, 23 years old, something like that. So in order to save your life, he had to guide people in other communities that were facing these types of these types of things. So he was accused to have been converted, but it's false. He did not convert to Islam, even though outwardly some people might not have realized that he was Jewish. He's always depicted wearing a turban, but it was a false rumor, started even in some cases by Jews. Okay, his legacy, as we've already talked about, some medical conditions, medical contributions. He wrote treatises on health, diet, and prevention, asthma, hepatitis. Um, Modern Rambam diet books exist. He was very big on digestion. He was talking about the sugar disease, where it makes it sound like he was already identified what diabetes was, and eating only when you're hungry, exercising. So uh, a lot of the stuff that he wrote in medicine might not be so relevant today, but a lot of it is prevention. A pound of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of the cure. I think Benjamin Franklin supposedly coined that saying, but he took it from Rambam, his philosophy on dealing with prevention rather than treating the problem after it's been caused. Okay, family uh, raised his brother's orphaned daughter. His son, Rabbi Abraham ben Harambam, succeeded him as the Nagid of Mitzrayim. He wrote his own book on Musar, which is like moral character development, ethics, which has recently been translated into English. He called something like the book that is sufficient to know how to serve God, or the comprehensive guide for the servants of God. It's one of these types of titles. If you just look up Rabbi Abraham ben Harambam, its Wikipedia has got these types of titles. I'm not sure what the exact title is, but the book that is sufficient to know God, or the comprehensive guide for the servants of God. It's something like that. And Rambam died in 1204 at 68 in Egypt. He's buried in Tiberias, Israel. I guess this is where you go visit his tomb, where you'll see that famous quote. Okay, lessons from his life. Perseverance. He wrote monumental works amid exile, poverty, and tragedy, sometimes traveling from work to home, and sometimes in his own bed at night, helping people. So we have no excuse to say I don't have time to work and teach. He says the whole purpose of learning Torah is to teach others. So if you're in a room by yourself learning for you, that's good for you, but you're not fulfilling the mitzvah of learning Torah unless you're teaching others. So we can't say we don't have time. We work a lot. He did it through all of these types of obstacles in his life, so we can all strive to do the same. Balance. He advocated Torah with parnasah, working livelihood, though his own life demanded extreme sacrifice. There are stories of how he wrote on the way to and from work as a doctor, and how he only had 15 minutes a day to himself to eat. And other than that, he was working and teaching from the bed that he was laying in at night, teaching and preaching. and practicing what you preach. That's what Rambam was all about. He had a lot of opposition, so he displayed courage. In his introduction to the Moreh Nevuchim, he said his justification for doing this was two things. Number one, he has no intention of creating chaos, which was sort of an admission that he knows doing it is going to be controversial, but it was not his intent to cause chaos. And two was that it needs to be done. Somebody has to do it. So that's where he was showing courage to say, even if we're going to be attacked and slandered, somebody has to do it. And if nobody else is going to do it, I'm going to do it, even if it makes me hated for doing so. He's going to do the right thing. So he demonstrated courage. He defended his views against fierce opposition, leaving a legacy that shaped Judaism forever. From 1204 when he died to today, you see how people are still talking about the Rambam. In his guide for the perplexed, in his introduction, he says that he knows the book is going to cause chaos, but he relied on two things. I guess this is what I just said. This is how you know I'm not commenting on somebody else. This is because it's coming out of my mind. This is how I articulate it. His justification for writing it's not to. His intent is not to cause chaos, and that he knew it needed to be done. Someone had to do it, even if it's going to be unpopular. Okay, the Rif. Okay, we're on page 6. Okay, we know the Shulchan Aruch was compiled by the Rif, the Rosh, and the Rambam. Yosef Karo took these three people, and whatever a topic came up, he took their opinions, the Rif, the Rosh, and the Rambam. Whenever two of them agreed, that's what went into the Shulchan Aruch. Whenever one disagreed, that opinion was thrown out. And the deck was stacked because Rambam says the Rif is flawless, and he can count on one hand the number of times he disagrees with the Rif, which means whatever the Rif says, that's what the Rambam is going to go with. So there's less than 5 times, or maximum 5 times, where the Rif will say something that the Rambam disagrees with. So when you have the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rosh, the Rif and the Rambam always agree. If it's one of these few controversial things where the Rambam disagrees with the Rif, then there perhaps it's the Rif and the Rosh agree, Rambam's thrown out, that goes into the Shulchan Aruch. But 95% of the time, you already have the Rif and the Rambam agreeing. If there's a disagreement, that's the Rosh bringing that in. So this is why we say the Shulchan Aruch is 95% Rambam. Anyway, it's because Rambam was a student of the person who learned from the Rif. I don't remember if it was the son of the Rif or a student of the Rif, but that's why the Rambam follows the Rif. So who was the Rif? Rabbi Isaac Alfasi. He lived from 1013 to 1103. Remember, Rambam was born in 1135. So he was one of the most influential, and he was the early Rishonim. Rambam is a Rishon. This is the generation of the Rishonim, the medieval Talmudic authorities. Rif was born in Algeria. He later moved to Fez, Morocco, hence his title Alfasi or Harif. His greatest work, Sefer HaHalachot, the Book of Laws, is an abridgment of the Talmud. I think the Rif's commentary is found in like the back of the Gemara, at the end of them. Okay. What did his work accomplish? It summarized the Talmud's halakhic rulings. The Rif went through the Babylonian Talmud only. Remember, I said Rambam went through the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud and all of the Baraitot and all these other things. Rambam went through all of it. The Rif only went through the Babylonian Talmud, smaller amount of work, and he gave you the practical halacha. He left out the debates, the tangents, the agadic, non-legal, the stories, the non-legal sections. So, for example, if a Talmudic discussion, a sugya, and Bava Kama spans 5 pages, the Rif might condense it to a half a page of clear rulings. So now you don't need to go through five pages of this discussion. You can just see what the Rif says. This was like the inspiration for the Mishnah Torah. Rambam looked at what the Rif did and says, that's a good idea, but I can make it better. Instead of only dealing because the Babylonian Talmud, this is the Gemara that was that community's commentary on the Mishnah. Well, what about the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud? That Gemara is that community's commentary on the Mishnah. Rif didn't deal with that. So the Rambam says it's a good idea, but it's incomplete. We need to do more. Okay, so when the Rif did this, he only covered applicable halakha. The Rif did not focus on things that couldn't happen, like animal sacrifice. We don't have a Sanhedrin in this time. We can't execute people. We can't do things like that. So the Rif only covered applicable halakha. This is sort of like the Shulchan Aruch. Only covers things in the diaspora. Doesn't deal with the Sanhedrin because we don't have a Sanhedrin. So Rambam went through all of it. He covers all of it. So another problem is that what the Rif did, let me finish this. He only covered laws relevant in his time, monetary laws, holidays, marriage. He skipped things like temple sacrifices, ritual purity, which were not practiced post-temple destruction. The other thing the Rif did is he organized it the same way the Talmud did. He followed the Talmud structure. Same tractate, same order, but it made it far more accessible for practical study. So, like we said, to learn how to keep Shabbat, you got to go to 5 different sections of the Talmud. The Rif followed that structure. Rambam, so that's what inspired Rambam. Rambam saw the Rif's work as a model, but wanted to go further. The Rif's halachot was revolutionary in its time, but it still required Talmudic knowledge to navigate. So it was sort of like a companion guide to help those who were learning Talmud. But the Daf Yomi wasn't even started till like 1920, 1921. So this was really for rabbis. Only rabbis were going through the Talmud. This helped rabbis, but Rambam said, rabbis are not always helping the people. So we need to help the people. Sometimes rabbis were just collecting like a temple tax. You don't know what's kosher and what's not. You don't even know how to read. You got to come to me to tell you what you can and can't do. You got to be told what to do all the time. And you need to support me because that's my job as rabbi. They don't have any other source of income. Rambam was against this. So he wanted to take what Rif was doing to help rabbis and take that power away from the rabbis and put it in the hands of the people. So that's what he did with Mishnah Torah, and this is kind of what inspired him to do that. So your average Jew does not have to have this Talmudic knowledge to master halakha, Torah Sheba Al Peh. All he needs now is Mishnah Torah. That's one of the controversial truths that people had a problem with, they were offended about. Okay, so he aimed to create a completely independent systematic code, one that didn't even require the Talmud study to understand. And did he achieve that? I think he did. There's a lot of examples of it I could go through. The one I have in my head is Suribia chapter 12, halakha 17. There is no difference between a native-born Jew and a convert. This is what a Jew is. Even when you look at the commentary on that, it says with regards to observance, whatever this person who converted does, whatever this person who was born Jewish does, it's the same thing. There's no difference. You don't have to master all these laws to know the difference. It's written that simply, that clear and concise. There's an example I'm tempted to go through. I can show you the source, but I want to get through this quickly, where it not only tells you the law, it tells you how to think as an individual. It gives you an example that, and I'm paraphrasing here, I'd have to read it to show you exactly, but it says, if you have a jewel, like a diamond, some type of thing that was used that's not kosher for whatever reason, and it falls into a pile of 99. So now you have one diamond and 99 cubic zirconians, or the opposite, one cubic zirconians, 99 diamonds. You don't know which one is the real one. They're all mixed up. And you're on a ship. And 60 of them go overboard. They're in the ocean. Now you've got 40 left. Which one is the bad one? Which one is the good one? We don't know. So we rule that all 40 of them are kosher. Why? Even though it could be one of these didn't go overboard. One of the problematic ones is still here because of the rule of the majority. The majority has gone overboard. The fake one was probably in there. So what we're left with is a large group that is not the majority. We don't need to assume the worst. Assume these things are good. You don't need to get rid of them because it could potentially, hypothetically, be problematic and invalidate them. We don't need to do it. Now, is this a real example that's ever going to happen? No. So why is it here? It's showing you how to think, how to apply the law. What if we have a diamond that was used in idolatrous practice, and now we have 999 diamonds that were not? You mix the one in with them all. You know, one of them was um, was used for idolatrous practice, and now you throw a bunch of them overboard. You throw two of them overboard, so now we still have about 1,000. Can we say, well, 1,000 of them is a lot? One of the ones was possibly thrown overboard. Nope. This was used in idolatry. This invalidates all 1,000 of them. You cannot have an item you know was used in idolatrous practices in this group that we know the majority is good. It's going to invalidate all of them. You can't have the possibility of idolatrous things being allowed in and polluting what we know is good. Is this a real life example that's going to happen? Probably not. So it's not only giving you the actual law. This is the law of meat and dairy. This is the law of, how to shecht an animal so we know it's a kosher shechita. It gives you the actual law, but it also shows you how to apply these principles to future hypothetical situations that you might find yourself in. This is something that every student that's been through no rabbinical program will benefit from. This is why I don't think any Jewish kid should get out of high school without going through Mishnah Torah at least one time. You can do 3 chapters a day for free on Chabad.org. You can listen to it on audio. You don't have to buy any books. You will at least be exposed to all of it. And he reorganized it so you can find everything you need to know. Laws of Shabbat here. Laws of kosher or forbidden foods here. You can find it all in a much better way. It was all reorganized when he codified it. Where even were we? Okay, so the Rif, his early work was Hilchot Yerushalmi, which was lost for centuries. He only covered the Babylonian Talmud, which was considered the primary source, but Rambam, as a young scholar, went through the Jerusalem Talmud as well, what the Rif did for the Babylon. So this is another thing that Rambam did for the Jerusalem Talmud, the way the Rif did it only for the Babylonian Talmud. Okay, this showed his ambition at that point to systemize all of Jewish law, even areas that other people neglected. Okay, so later that's when he did the Mishnah Torah, where he also went through the Sifri, the Sifra, the Mechilta, the Tosefta. He went through all of the other stuff as well. I mean, just that right there. Look at the amount of material he went through to put it all in. If you go through the Talmud, it takes you 7.5 years to go through it one time. The Rambam went through both Talmuds as well as all this other stuff and codified it for you. The large amount of work that he reduced down to one book. One book is 14 volumes. It's not as big as it looks, but it's 14 volumes, but it's a lot of stuff that he condensed. That's pretty amazing. Okay, so the Mishnah Torah, the Rif's vision perfected. The Rif's work was still tied to the Talmud structure. The Rambam and his Mishnah Torah, which was written decades later, reorganized all of the halakha by topic. Laws of Shabbat, laws of theft, making it intuitive even for the non-Talmudists. I wish he would have wrote a better table of contents. Right now, if you want to know one of these topics, let's say, for example, you want to know the laws of tzitzit. You have to know that it's in Sefer Ahava, which of the 14 is it in? Then you see in here we have all of these different sections in here, laws of this, that, and the other. Laws of tzitzit is one of them. Laws of berachot, for example. You have to know it's in this book. Then when you find laws of berachot, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, which chapter is the baracha that I'm looking for in? It doesn't tell you. For this reason, I still recommend people having a Kitzur Shulchan Aruch just for the table of contents. You can see, okay, I need to look at laws of tzitzit in my Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. It's on this page. There's your laws of tzitzit. So it's a much better table of contents. So I recommend you learn all of Mishnah Torah. I wish you would have done a better table of contents. That's something we need to create to solve that problem. Okay, but the way he reorganized it is great. Unlike the Rif, he included even the irrelevant laws like temple rituals. Irrelevant as in what type of utensils do we need to have for the temple that we don't have. When it gets created, there's tools that we have to use. How do we purify these tools? What are these tools? It's here. If the temple is built in our lifetime, we will know everything we need when the laws of purity are back in place. When once again have the ashes of the red heifer. All of this is here in Mishnah Torah. You won't find it in later books like the Shulchan Aruch, the Mishnah Brura, the Torah, and you won't find it in previous books like with the Rif. So he codified these irrelevant laws because he wanted a complete code. Okay, so this is a nice little chart here. Where did he outshine the Rif? On page 7. Okay, the feature, the scope, the Rif only did practical halacha, where the Rambam did all of it, even theoretical. Example, Avodat Kochavim, chapter 7, halacha 10. I don't remember what that example is. We could look it up, but which I might just do because I know there's something I want to see if this is the wrong number. For example, there you have to know Avodat Kochavim is in Sefer Hamada. Chapter 7, page 514. 514, chapter 7, halacha 10. Okay, this is that example. So when a false deity or an Asherah is burned, it is forbidden to benefit from its ashes. A coal taken from an idol is forbidden. A flame from an idol is permitted, or it is not an entity with substance. When there is a doubt whether an object is connected to idol worship or not, it is forbidden. However, if the doubt is compounded, it is permitted. What is implied? Okay, so there's the law. Here's the implication. Should a goblet used for idol worship fall into a storage room of goblets, they are all forbidden. Because a false deity and its accessories are always forbidden, regardless of the proportion of mixture that they make up. If one of the cups from this mixture becomes intermingled with 2 other cups, the entire second mixture is permitted. Should a ring used to adorn an idol become mixed together with 100 other rings, and then 2 of them fall into the Mediterranean Sea, it is permissible to use all of them. We presume that the forbidden ring was among the 2 which fell. Should a forbidden ring become mixed together with 100 others, then the group becomes divided. 40 being separated one group and 60 in another, and the entire group of 40 fall into another group of rings, it is permissible to use all of them. We presume that the forbidden ring remained among the majority. If the group of 60 fall into another group of rings, they are all forbidden. If that's confusing, remember, This is the Hebrew. This is the English. Both this and this is the commentary. Everybody explaining what that says. So it's explained pretty clear, but if it's not clear when you read it, there's lots of commentary in that book to explain it. So that's the theoretical example. That's why I put this in here. Was that was the exact source? Okay, the structure. The Rif followed the Talmud order, which is confusing in itself. Later in this course, I'm going to give you a very systematic way to understand it, the Talmud's order, but it is kind of complex. It's easier under Rambam because it's reorganized by topic. The dependence on the Talmud requires Talmudic knowledge to see what the Rif, to benefit from how the Rif helps. The Rambam, you don't need to read the Talmud at all, not once in your life, to benefit from it. The language is Aramaic Hebrew. Rambam, this is clear, concise Hebrew. Of course, it's been translated, but the difference here is his other works. Rambam wrote in Arabic using like Hebrew letters. This he wrote in actual Hebrew to make it clear for all the Hebrew speakers to understand. So his other works had to be translated in like a Hebrew letter forming Arabic words. This one was basic Hebrew that everyone could understand. The philosophical depth, the Rif is pure halakha. Rambam added ethical meta-halakhic ideas. He was a philosopher. This is what we see in the Moreh Nevuchim. Anytime he had a chance to inject his philosophy, he did it. So he talked about some philosophical ideas in Mishnah Torah, which is a halakhic book. So it's 95% halakha, but he does insert some non-halakhic ideas into the Mishnah Torah, such as Hilchot Deot, ethical character development. This is not necessarily halakha. It's kind of philosophical advice. In the first book in Sefer Hamada, we find the laws of proper character traits like anger, pride, humility, eating habits, speech, etc. These are not rooted in specific mitzvot per se. They're not strictly halakhic in the way that the Rif codifies the law. The Rif's work is more Talmudic and halakhic, extracting practical law from the Gemara. It's not a practical law. You must not have pride. You must show humility. Okay, well, how do you show humility? Eating habits. This is not overeating, undereating, eating only when you're hungry. This is not an actual halakha. So there's some non-halakhic things, and this is one of the sections. Hilchot Teshuvah is another one. Okay, so for the Rambam, these are essential to Torah life, meta-halakhic values that must be lived. He even describes the golden path, a kind of Aristotelian ethical balance, showing influence from the philosophy. In fact, in the beginning of the Mishnah Torah, he talks about the different spheres of how the universe functions. This is Aristotelian understanding of how the world and the universe worked. This was their understanding of science at the time. So it's pretty clear that he was following that in the beginning. But he also said we should accept truth from whoever speaks it. So when it comes to like medical advice, science, we're not limited to this. He himself did not follow the medical advice of Chazal, which shows if he was alive today, he would not say we're limited to the medical advice that he gave us. So those types of things are not halakhic. And we do find this in Mishnah Torah, which is mostly halakhic. Okay, Hilchot Teshuvah, usually translated as repentance, but it literally means to return. So what are we returning to? The ways that the Torah tells us that we should be living. That's a better explanation of better translation of the word teshuvah, but it usually means repentance. Philosophical and ethical reflections. In Hilchot Teshuvah, Rambam doesn't just codify the laws of repentance. He goes deep into Bechira, free will, the soul. You can't have halakha, no law. Your soul does this. Your soul does not do that. That's not how law works. But he talks about it here. These are the philosophical ideas that he injects into his book of law. the idea of reward and punishment, and the nature of Olam Haba, the world to come. Again, not something a judge on a court can slap a gavel down and say, this is the law. This is how the world to come is going to function. But he inserts this philosophy into it. These are meta halakhic ideas, ethical and theological, beyond the Rif's halakhic style, which mostly focus on summarizing the Gemara's bottom line practical ruling. Okay, why was his approach controversial? Some rabbis felt that his omission of sources, unlike the Rif, who referenced the Talmudic debates, made halakha seem too rigid. But again, he didn't want you to get bogged down in these debates. That's why he intentionally left them out. His confidence in ruling alone, without always citing earlier authorities, upset scholars who valued tradition. They said, we need the debates. Okay, well, Rambam is not saying that you can't read the debates. He just didn't give you the sources from it. If you want to go read the debates, by all means, do the Daf Yomi. Read the Talmud every day if that's what you want to do. He's simply saying, I can make the ruling for you, and you don't have to read the debates if you don't want to. So there's really nothing wrong with that. The Kesef Mishnah was created, if you want to go back and see where Yosef Karo thinks these debates were had, and this is what Rambam is ruling on. But in some ways, Rambam was saying, I know better than you do. You're probably not going to understand what you're reading in the Talmud anyway. Why waste time on it? I'll tell you what the final ruling is. You can just trust me instead of trying to understand what it says. So people had confidence in him saying that, but is this really controversial? Is this really different than what you see rabbis today doing? Do rabbis ever tell you to go read the Talmud, or do they just tell you, look, this is what I learned in yeshiva, this is what my rabbi said, my rabbi is bigger than your rabbi, you think you know better than my rabbi? They do the exact same thing, but it was somehow controversial when Rambam did it. So, yet his clarity and completeness made the Mishnah Torah the gold standard for later codes, like the Shulchan Aruch, 95% Mishnah Torah anyway. So even though they harassed him at the time, it has stood the test of time. We see he achieved some ways he achieved his goal. He wanted it to be the final ruling. He didn't want there to be later books. There are later books, so in some way he didn't achieve that. But the fact that it is what it is, I think he pretty much achieves all anyone could expect one to achieve with a goal like that. What page are we on? Page 8. Okay, the Rif laid the groundwork for codifying halakha, but Rambam took it to the next level. So with the Rif, it's kind of distilled to what you need to know, getting rid of all the unnecessary stuff to what you need to know in your generation, in your time, to what's applicable then. The Rambam reimagined it and took it to a whole new level. Without the Rif's model, he might not have envisioned his own grand project, but he ultimately surpassed it in scope, organization, and accessibility in a way that even people that they don't paskin by Rambam, like Chabad, they'll tell you, we don't go by Rambam, but they have so much respect for it, they have it on their website. So it surpassed it in scope and accessibility. The accessibility that we have is largely thanks to people like Chabad that do not go by Rambam, but they have such respect for it that they are giving us this accessibility. Like we read other works that Rambam has done that to this day has not been translated to English. Mishnah Torah is, because they recognize it needs to be accessible because of what it's done for the Jewish people. Okay, this is on page 9 here now. Okay, we're almost to the end of today's course. Okay, back to the Rambam. Early writings in the authority, even in his 20s, he was issuing public letters addressing pressing issues such as forced conversions and martyrdom. Imagine, you're in an area, you're Jewish, the native population doesn't like you. They want you out, they want to kill you. Your life is in jeopardy, and you have questions. Am I supposed to give my life for this? Will I be forgiven if I do? Does my life come to an end now? Do I have to die like Rabbi Akiva did? Do I become a martyr? Kind of scared. I don't want my family to be murdered with me. What do I do? Real serious problems, and that they were facing. And he's writing these letters of forced conversions in the essay on the sanctification of God's name. This was not a letter written to any specific individual. It was a public letter to entire communities. And these were the names that the translators gave to the letter. It was guidance to communities who were dealing with Islamic persecution, whether they must give their lives, whether they should give their lives, how do they respond, what is their status if they did temporarily affirm the truth of Islam? Are they still Jewish? Are those types of questions? It makes you wonder, why would this young guy in his 20s be issuing public letters to Kehilot, communities, about how they should behave? Remember, this is at a time when Mishnah Torah had not even been written yet. So this kind of goes to show Rambam knew who he was. He knew he was not just one of many. He knew he was sort of above many of your local rabbis. This shows his early recognition as a leading authority. His reputation was established well before his major works, like the Mishnah Torah. He was like 23 years old, advising entire towns on what to do in these matters of life and death. Okay, his major works, and then we're about to stop for today. Hilchot Yerushalmi. This was a lost work written in his late teens, early 20s. This was an attempt to summarize the Jerusalem Talmud's halakhic rulings, similar to what the Rif did with the Babylonian Talmud. It was lost for centuries. Fragments were rediscovered in the Cairo Geniza and later published by Rabbi Saul Lieberman. Milot Higayon, I don't know how you say that. Logical terminology. A work on Aristotelian logic, though its authorship is debated. Some believe it was falsely attributed to Rambam. We know the way plagiarism works today is you take somebody else's work and you say it's yours. But it used to work the opposite. You would write something and say, this guy wrote it, Moshe De Leon writes a book and calls it the Zohar, and says that the Rashbi wrote it. They say this guy wrote a book and they said that Rambam wrote it. So it's disputed. What we started off with, the Parush HaMishnayot, the commentary to the entire Mishnah. This was written between 23 and 30, ages 23 and 30. This commentary was revolutionary because it provided concise halakhic rulings from the Talmud. It included four major introductions that are standalone philosophical works. And we'll go through those four and then we'll stop. Okay, the introduction to the Mishnah. This is what I was telling you. It's like $12 on Amazon. Even if it's $50 on Amazon, it's worth it. Get it. Very valuable. It explains the oral Torah's authority and the structure of rabbinic tradition. Explains explanations on how halakha functions. This is mandatory reading, in my view, in my opinion. It's not just an introduction to the Mishnah. It's an introduction to Torah Shiva al Peh, Halakha LaMoshe Sinai, the difference between Torah law and rabbinic law, and the whole legal system. Now, when you get into the Mishnah Torah, Hilchot Mamre is going to tell you exactly how it functions. But this is the principle. These are the roots of how the principle and how it's going to function. So you understand what you're dealing with. Hilchot Mamre is the nitty gritty. Halakha 1, Halakha 2, the exact way that it functions. Last week I did a tour of my channel. We did How Does Halakha Function? Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, Part 4. That's the individual chapters of Hilchot Mamre. But the introduction to the Mishneh Torah gives you the explanation on the roots, the roots that have to be there. Okay, the second one is the introduction to Perek Halak. This is Sanhedrin 10 from the Talmud. Okay, this outlines the 13 principles of faith and the very nation of Agadah or Agadata, depending on if you're using Hebrew or Aramaic, non-legal Talmudic narratives. This is where we get every Jew gets a share in the world to come. People quote that. What's the next half of the sentence? And these are the ones that don't. So when people often say every Jew gets a share in the world to come, they are quoting this, but they're chopping half of the sentence off, pretending that the other half doesn't. So you need the whole sentence to get the context. I can't just edit out everything I don't like in a transcript, right? So this indicates that there are Jews that do not get a share in the world to come, and it lists which ones they are. So these are examples of how people would cherry pick and craft a narrative, and it's bad to do that. They have to eliminate part of the sources that they're quoting in order to make their narrative make sense. So most of the Sanhedrin tractate is the legal structure, but this one, Parachalic, Sanhedrin 10, is the section that deals with the heavenly stuff. That's non-legal. We can't enact laws on who goes where in the world to come. That's for Hashem to decide. So what must a Jew believe? Even though there are those like Yosef Albo, he wrote Sefer Irakarim, Book of the Principles. He believed there's only 13. There's only 3 principles, not 13. One is the belief in the existence of God. 2, belief in the revelation of God, in the Torah, giving of the Torah. And 3 is the reward and punishment, whether that is in this world or the next. Also there's a book by Menachem Kellner called Must a Jew Believe Anything? I have not read the book, but apparently, according to this book, there's nothing that a Jew must believe. What you now doing is another thing. Just believe in God and do mitzvot. So there's only one belief there. You only have to believe that there is a God. So this is the argument when Chabad comes up to you and says, "Is your mother Jewish?" You say, "Yes." "Oh, let's put on tefillin." "What if you're an atheist? How are you connecting to God?" "Oh, how do you have kavanah, proper intention?" They'll tell you, you don't need intention. It doesn't say have proper intention. It says put on tefillin. Their argument is that if you put on tefillin, then following a mitzvah, something spiritual and magical will happen. Then you will connect, you will have intention, and then later you will develop kavanah. But they're starting from the premise what you have to do is follow the commandment. Because you're Jewish, you need to follow the mitzvot, comply with the law, on tefillin. So believing, that's nice, but you need to do what you're expected to do. That's the premise of this book. Okay. So this is the third one. Yeah, no, this is the fourth one. Okay, Introduction to Pirkei Avot. Pirkei Avot is the section of the Talmud. It means the ethics of our fathers. It's like nice sayings, clever sayings that teach Musar ethics. And so he wrote an introduction to that. You know, the Mishnah Torah is 14 volumes. There's sets of Mishnah Torah now that include sections that he did not write. Rambam did not write Pirkei Avot. This is from the Talmud. He takes sections of Pirkei Avot, which gives us like the transmission of Smicha, and he puts that in an introduction to Mishnah Torah. So this could be why some Mishnah Torah sets, which is 14 volumes, they'll add things like Pirkei Avot. Are they adding Pirkei Avot, or are they adding his introduction to Pirkei Avot? I don't know. Maybe because this is a Rambam work, that he wrote an introduction to it. Maybe that's what's getting added in some Mishnah Torah sets, which is not originally included in the Mishnah Torah set. It could be. I don't know. I don't have that in my set. But this is the other thing that he wrote. It focuses on ethics, free will, and character development. What do we believe in Midrash, folklore, and legend? If you have the view that everything they say, you are stupid. I didn't type this up right. If you have the view that everything Midrash say are true and literal, everything they say are literal, you are stupid. Well intended and pious, but foolish. If you have the view that they are all superstitions and have or lies, they have no value, then you are evil because you're dismissing them all. That's a harsh way to put it. The nicer way to say it would be if you take them all literally, you're a fool. But also, if you dismiss them all as having no value, then you are also a fool. He says that everything they say is true, but not everything that is true is to be understood literally. They could be metaphorical or allegorical, a form of symbolic communication. He said he was going to write a book letting us know which ones were literal and which ones were not. Unfortunately, that book was never written. So there's a level of subjectivity to them today. So now this is why we say you might take this one literally, and I just think it's a story to teach a lesson. Well, you know, we have a difference of opinion. There's another one where I might say literal. You think it's telling us a lesson. He intended to write us a list so we can tell which ones were literal and which ones were not. Would have been nice if he would have done that because that also would have dated them. We would have known this midrash is from at least this time. And now we have to wonder, when was this one made up? Was it the jewelry store owner in New York City? This is obviously a more recent one, but he never wrote that. So now there's a level of subjectivity. We all have to determine for ourselves which ones do we take literal and which ones do we not. Okay, even a myth can be more true than a fact. For example, a symbolic truth can be that a single drop of ink drowned 100,000 Jews. If you take it literally, you will think either it was a huge drop of ink to make a big pool big enough to kill 100,000 Jews, or the ink or the Jews were microscopic. 100,000 tiny Jews fit in one drop of ink. If you take it symbolically, then with the proclamation of a king signed with one drop of ink, the lives of many Jews can be ruined. We see this in the Purim story. A declaration by the king says, "On this day, all Jews are going to be go through something very terrible." So you don't have to take it literally, but it can still be true. So then, introduction to Seder Taharot. This systematizes the complex laws of ritual purity, which was a groundbreaking achievement. And then we're moving on to other things. This is page 10, I think. Getting on to page 11. Okay, so this is a good stopping point for lesson number 1. As you can see, we're on page 10 and 11. I've already got 61 pages. I'm not even done with the material that I'm using to compile this, so it's going to go on for many weeks. I'll start another playlist on the channel called Rambam, and we'll do this in the series there. And that'll be however many videos it takes to get to the end of it. Tuesdays, 10 a.m. Eastern times. Sometimes I'm not able to make it because I do work and I'm not able to get here in time for the class. But I've got a good introduction to the Mishnah Torah. So if that happens and I can't be here for one of them, we'll use that as the substitute. So every week, God willing, we'll have something that we can keep progressing in this Rambam series. And then and that's the plan. That's what we'll do until we run out of Rambam material. It's going to be a long time before we get to that point. Any questions? Anything anybody wants to say before we stop the recording? Okay, then either me or my pre-recorded substitute will see you next week in the event that I can't make it next week.